Have you ever done something that you knew was right for your heart, only to be met with silence, or worse, with punishment? Maybe it happened when you finally drew a boundary with your adult child, a child who always seemed to need more, take more, and give very little in return. And maybe, just maybe, the moment you stepped back, they told the world you were the one who walked away. If that sounds familiar, you are not alone. A lot of parents, especially folks in their 60s, 70s, even older, find themselves dealing with adult children whose behavior is deeply confusing, hurtful, and manipulative. And sometimes, for the sake of your own peace of mind, your health, or even your sanity, the only path forward is stepping away. But what happens when the child you raised reacts not with understanding, but with rage, silence, or emotional games? That's what we're going to talk about today. Because when your child shows these harmful patterns, always needing to be the center of attention, blaming others for their problems, refusing to take responsibility, stepping back isn't seen as a simple boundary. To them, it feels like a direct attack. And you're not abandoning them. You're stepping away from their need to control you. That's the moment the storm often begins. The first thing many parents notice is the dramatic shift in roles. Suddenly, your child becomes the victim. The one you supported for decades now paints themselves as the one who was mistreated. They might say things like, "She just cut me off," or "He never loved me." And they'll say it with such emotion that even you might start to question what really happened. That role reversal isn't accidental, it's strategic. If they can convince others, and you, that they were the one hurt, then they stay in control of the narrative. And once they've taken on the role of the wounded child, the next thing you may see is something called hoovering. It's named after a vacuum cleaner for a reason, because just when you think you've broken free, they try to suck you right back in. This can come in the form of late-night phone calls, tearful apologies, unexpected gifts, or messages saying, "I've changed." For a parent who's always hoped for healing, it can be so tempting to believe them. But here's what I want you to remember. When someone is truly changing, their actions are consistent over time. Real transformation doesn't arrive in sudden bursts of affection after years of neglect or mistreatment. Often, brief moments of kindness are used to reset the situation, calm your doubts, and make it easier for the same harmful patterns to continue, just wrapped in a different package. And if you don't return, if you hold the line and protect your peace, that's when they might start reaching out to everyone else in your life. Cousins, siblings, family friends, church members, you name it. They'll tell stories that twist your truth. They might say you abandoned them during their time of need, that you've become bitter or senile, or that you never loved them. And the goal here is simple: isolation. Because if they can turn others against you, they believe you'll have no choice but to return. Not for love, but out of guilt, fear, or loneliness. It's a cruel playbook, but it's a common one. And sadly, many parents fall into this emotional trap. Then comes the wave of guilt, sometimes subtle, sometimes loud. You may hear things like, "After everything I've done for you," or "You're ruining this family." They may even threaten to cut you off, take you out of the will, or disappear entirely. You may be told you're a terrible parent, or made to feel like you're the one breaking the family apart. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not cruelty, they're clarity. And there's a big difference between healthy family dynamics and ones where love is only given in exchange for obedience. And when guilt doesn't work, many parents experience something even more painful: being rejected by the very person they once rocked to sleep. It's heartbreaking. Your child may send you a message saying, "You're dead to me," or block your number, or tell the family they've disowned you. It's a deep wound, and if you've ever been on the receiving end, I want you to hear this from me clearly. You are not alone, and you are not a bad parent for protecting yourself from pain. This kind of rejection is emotional punishment. It's a last-ditch effort to regain control, even if it means pretending they're the ones ending the relationship. And for many seniors I've spoken to over the years, this is one of the most emotionally complex parts of the journey, because it feels like you've lost a part of yourself. But sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. And just when you start to heal from that silence, when the chaos settles, you might get a message out of the blue. It's kind, it's gentle, maybe even tearful. They say, "I've done some thinking," or "I miss you." You feel that old hope again. You wonder, maybe this time it's real. But here's something you need to know. Some adult children can offer apologies without ever intending to change. That sudden burst of sweetness is often just another strategic move. It's not a sign of healing. It's simply a reset meant to restore the old balance and pull you back into the same role. As you listen to your child speak softly for the first time in years, ask yourself, does their apology come with accountability or just an expectation that you'll pretend nothing happened? Because forgiveness is a gift, but reconciliation is a process. One that should be built on safety, not just sentiment. And if you start to express your truth, your side of the story, they may begin to rewrite history. Suddenly, the events you remember so clearly are being questioned. That's not what happened, they say. Or worse, you're remembering it wrong. This is gaslighting, and it's designed to make you doubt your own memories, your own pain, your own reality. But you know what you lived through. And the truth doesn't stop being true just because someone else refuses to believe it. There's more to uncover, more ways certain adult children react when you no longer allow them to dominate your life. But before we go any further, I want to say this. You have the right to protect your peace. You have the right to grow, even if others label it abandonment. And you have the right to live the rest of your life not weighed down by guilt, but guided by clarity. Let's keep going. Once the rewriting of history begins, it often leads into even deeper levels of emotional manipulation. You might notice your child bringing up financial arrangements, things like past loans, unpaid support, or shared property. They may suddenly decide to cut you off from a will, pull back on helping with your needs, or bring up money they once gave you in moments of generosity, now turning it into a weapon. For some parents, the financial connection was something they believed would help keep the bond alive. A college fund, a small house in your name, shared insurance, or simply the ongoing support you promised if their health or stability was ever at risk. But with an adult child who relies on control, financial support can quickly turn into leverage. It becomes a tool of pressure, a way to communicate. If you don't fall back in line, there will be consequences. And even when it's never said out loud, the message comes through loud and clear. In families where finances were used to buy love, this shift can feel especially devastating. The very things you once thought were signs of care now feel like traps. And the grief that comes with that realization is real. You're not just losing a connection, you're realizing it may have never been the kind of love you believed it was. And sometimes the manipulation doesn't even look like anger or punishment. It looks like sadness, a deep, overwhelming sadness that feels genuine. You may hear your child's voice crack as they talk about how much they're hurting. You may see tears, receive long messages describing their pain, or hear through others that they're not doing well. It's not uncommon for some adult children to fall into what appears to be an emotional collapse, so intense and convincing that you begin to question yourself and wonder whether you've misunderstood them all along. This is one of the most dangerous moments for a loving parent. Because your heart is still soft, and as a parent, the instinct to protect never really goes away. You may feel pulled back in, not out of guilt or manipulation, but out of compassion. You may tell yourself, what if they really are in pain? What if they do something drastic and I wasn't there? But here's the reality. When the child you've stepped away from has deeply ingrained controlling patterns, even their most dramatic expressions of sorrow can function as a way to pull you back in. Their pain may feel real, and in some ways it is, but it's often not truly about repairing the relationship. It's about losing access to the person they once controlled. The breakdown isn't because they miss you as a whole person. It's because they miss the influence and power they had over your life. And that's why you may also encounter something far more unsettling: complete and total denial. One day, you set a clear boundary. You said you needed space or time or peace. Maybe you sent a letter, maybe you had a difficult conversation, But after all that, they act like nothing happened. No acknowledgement. No discussion. Just silence followed by casual contact. As if your words were never said. As if your pain never existed. This kind of denial is a form of emotional erasure. It's not forgiveness. It's not reconciliation. It's an attempt to wipe away your voice, to make you feel like your truth didn't matter. And if you're not careful, it can slowly draw you back into the exact same dynamic you tried so hard to escape. If you're watching this and nodding your head, if these patterns feel painfully familiar, please know this: your story is not rare. Many good, loving parents end up caught in this kind of toxic cycle with their adult children. And too often, the outside world doesn't understand. People ask, how could you walk away from your own child? Or worse, what did you do to make them act that way? They don't see the years of disrespect, the emotional and financial exhaustion. They don't see the anxiety, the subtle manipulation, or the quiet grief of having your love turned into something used against you. And sadly, this is often the point where your adult child becomes even more calculated in how they respond. Because when they know you've distanced yourself, they don't stop. They bring in others. They may go to your siblings, your friends, even your church community. They tell their version of the story to people who care about you, or who might be swayed to take their side. These people become what we call flying monkeys, a term that comes from the Wizard of Oz, where the witch never did her dirty work alone. Instead, she sent others to do her bidding. These flying monkeys might call you with concern, saying things like, "Your daughter is hurting so much. Can't you just talk to her?" Or they may pass along guilt. "Your son told me he's heartbroken. He misses you. Isn't life too short to hold a grudge?" And while they may mean well, they're unknowingly being used as pawns in a much larger emotional game. It can be incredibly confusing, because the people calling you sound kind. They speak the language of family, of love, of unity. But their words are often rehearsed, fed to them by a child who's determined to make you out to be the problem. And if you aren't grounded in your truth, it's very easy to second-guess yourself. So how do you stay strong when the world around you is trying to pull you back into a role you've worked so hard to leave? You start by remembering this. Peace is not something you have to earn through suffering. And love does not mean surrendering your self-respect. You can love someone from a distance. You can wish the best for your child without allowing them to hurt you. And most of all, you can live the rest of your life with clarity, even if others refuse to see the truth. No one gets to decide how much you're allowed to endure, except you. You are not heartless. You are not weak. You are not abandoning your child. You are choosing to no longer abandon yourself. Let's continue. By the time a parent decides to step back from a deeply self-centered adult child, it's rarely a sudden decision. It isn't made out of anger or spite. It grows out of quiet exhaustion, after years of hoping, waiting, explaining, forgiving, and trying to create peace where there was none. That's the part most people never witness. They only notice the moment you finally drew a line. But that line was never the beginning of the story. It was the closing of a very long chapter, filled with pain. Now that we've walked through the many reactions an adult child like this may have, whether it's reversing roles, using guilt and emotional pressure, or trying to reshape the past, it's important that we talk about you. Not just what it's like to be on the receiving end of these behaviors, but the deeper reality of being a parent who truly tried their best and still found themselves here. Because here's what's often left unspoken. When you pull away from your child, especially after decades of pouring into them, it can feel like a kind of death. There's grief, confusion, even shame. You might find yourself lying awake at night, replaying memories, wondering, was it my fault? Did I mess up too much? Should I try again? That self-doubt is a wound that runs deep in good-hearted people. And if you're the kind of parent who gave and gave, it's not easy to suddenly be the one who walks away, especially when the world expects parents to love unconditionally no matter the cost. But unconditional love does not mean unconditional tolerance of abuse. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy your peace. And being a parent doesn't mean turning yourself into a doormat for their unresolved wounds. So what can you do to stay grounded in the face of all this? When the guilt creeps in, when the flying monkeys start to circle, when the apologies come without action, when the sadness feels unbearable, you start by reconnecting with your own truth. Remember the moments, big or small, that made you realize something had to change. Maybe it was when your child cursed you out for the third time in a month. Maybe it was when they borrowed money with promises to repay, but instead used it to control you. Maybe it was when they ignored your health issues while demanding your attention for every little crisis of their own. Whatever those moments were, write them down. Not to relive the pain, but to remind yourself that your decision wasn't random. It came from a place of wisdom and survival. Next, build a support system, not one built on guilt or obligation, but one built on mutual respect. This could be a therapist who understands family trauma. It could be a small circle of friends who listen without judging. It could even be an online group of parents who faced similar heartbreak. Healing doesn't have to happen alone, and you're never too old to create new bonds based on honesty and peace. It's also worth remembering this. Some people never see the damage they cause until they lose access to the people they once controlled. For a few, distance might eventually lead to insight. It might cause them to pause, reflect, and even begin a real journey of change. But that change can't be the condition of your peace. You can hope for it, you can pray for it, but you can't wait for it. Because your life, your health, your spirit, they matter now. Not someday. Now. And if your child never changes, if they stay stuck in blame and control and denial, then it's still okay to keep your distance. It's still okay to protect yourself. It's still okay to live a life that's quieter, lighter, freer, even if it's lonelier than you expected. Sometimes we think the hardest part of aging is our bodies slowing down. But more often, it's our hearts carrying the weight of all the relationships we couldn't fix. And that's why it's so important to forgive, not always others, but yourself. Forgive yourself for the times you stayed too long, for the years you kept the door open when it was only used to hurt you. Forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know back then. And most of all, forgive yourself for choosing peace over performance. You are not a failed parent. You are not cruel. You are someone who has finally learned the difference between love and sacrifice. And that kind of clarity isn't just a gift to yourself, it's a gift to the world around you. Because when elders step into their truth, when they live boldly and honestly, they give permission for others to do the same. So if you're watching this right now, and you've been holding on to guilt, let it go. If you've been wondering whether you were wrong to draw that boundary, hear me, you weren't. And if you felt alone in this, you are absolutely 100% not. There are more of us out here than you think. Quiet warriors, healing parents, kind souls who finally chose themselves. And the more we speak, the more we break the silence. The more we share, the more we heal. If this message spoke to you, I invite you to share your story in the comments. You don't have to go into detail. Just knowing you're not alone can help someone else take their first step toward peace. And if you found comfort here, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, Strong Elderly Life. We share real conversations for real people, because life after 60 isn't just about growing older. It's about growing wiser, stronger, and more free. Here's to living the rest of your life with dignity, clarity, and courage. You deserve nothing less.